case to us. So the first column you see, RE is the real estate portion, right? That's the assessed value of the property for all of these. The next column is PPT, is personal property tax. All right, so that's the value of the assets within the business, right? So whatever equipment, fixtures, things of that nature, how they get valued and reported. So an assessed value. So for example, you can see the real estate value of the Crest Plaza is about $4.6 million, the Crest property. And the value of their property is about 382, right? So you might be thinking there are a lot of Jaguars down there. How is it only 382,000? Their inventory is not included, right? So reading across the total assessment, you just sum that up, and then at $45.08 a mil, that's the relative tax contribution from the Crest Auto dealership, about $224,000. Then you go in and you can do the math for the others, right? So DeAndrea Plaza is another good example. Real estate value is about 1.1 million. That excludes Starbucks. That's sort of its own piece of real estate, right? So that plaza is about 1.1 million. The combined value of the personal property for Katz, the Micro Creamery, and State Farm rolls up to about 400,000. So that entire plaza contributes $69,000 a year to Woodbridge in taxes. All right. Then you go down, you see the gas station, use the same math, right? 35K. Nepco. Nepco looks odd. Nepco has a pretty, I think, a pretty decent, in terms of their personal property tax. I think their assessment, a lot of their equipment is not taxable based on some state ordinance or whatever, not to get into a ton of weeds, but so their net contribution to Woodbridge is about $20,000. Starbucks is $14,000 a year, right? So just these 5 examples are about $363,000 in total. If you sum up all of the businesses on the commercial real estate and the personal property, everything within Woodbridge is about 14 million, right? And you compare that to our annual budget, if you go all the way to the bottom, is about 51 million. So what?
What?
Right? Scott?
Do we, where do we publish the top 10? Is that in the bonding reports when you get
Yeah,
bond,
when
your
you
bond rating,
go
you
out
get your
for
top 10?
GO bonding for, whatever,
Right.
schools or whatever, the bond rating agencies want to see the top 10, so that's the best place to find it. And you got to keep up with that because it does fluctuate, So is there a Stop and Shop in that?
That's
No.
New
Oh, is
Hampshire.
that gone?
A small slice of it is actually
Yeah, when
taxable
it was
to us.
there, that would have been one of the top 10 employers, but then you also have the top 10 tax, you have both ways. But it's in your bonding report.
Right. Right. So, anything jump out? Any impressions from just these samples?
Do we have comparisons of what similar towns or adjacent towns are in terms of percentage?
Yeah, I mean, we can start to dig into that, right? I personally was pretty surprised to see like 28% of the town budget
That much.
comes from.
I thought that was way high. I was impressed with that, actually. that a
What
large-
do you see in some other towns, Dale?
Oh, I see in the teens, it depends
Really?
on how much land is zoned for commercial, to explain why it is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know your zoning at all, so, but that is very high. Usually, you're talking 14, 15%. In Hamden, it was like 12%, something like that, but it's a bigger town, it's more area, more housing to offset it, but that number is big.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to, that actually makes the point, when you get data, what do you do with the data? It's good to know it, but that drives the conversation about business retention. You want to keep that
Mm-hmm.
the way it is. You don't want it to go down, because then the burden will shift to the homeowner, other
Right.
taxes.
And do towns look at that in terms of overall percentage? Do they look at it in terms of percent per person, per square mile, per town, or?
It's just percent of the grand
Total
list.
revenue.
Of the budget.
It's usually simple. But the other illustrative thing, I don't know, this is the right time to bring this up, but when you look at your total grand list, should I bring this up
Mhm.
as a topic? So your total grand list, everything in houses, cars, equipment, commercial, is $1.161 billion. And a rule of thumb in terms of changing the taxes dynamic, so your tax rate is what, 46 or something like that?
40,
which is
45,
40
oh wait.
which is-
4508.
Listen, I come from a place that's 56, sorry, so, you know,
Mhm.
you're doing great to us, but,
Right.
but it's still pretty high for a suburban town, 46. So if you were to try to lower it to 45, just making up something here, you have to raise $1.16
About
million
1.2 million.
in revenue. And if you look at at what he did on this sheet to show you who's paying taxes, 363,000, you would need like almost 4 of those
To move it
New.
1 mil.
to lower taxes by 1 mil. So that's why when you see towns go, oh, we lowered taxes by 0.012 mils, because it's so hard to move the needle. Now, that could be also a combination of lowering expenses. So that 1.2 million could be a combination of tax revenue, not assessed value, but tax revenue. And lowering, but expenses are really hard to lower, especially with, the the small government that you would have in Woodbridge. So it can give you motivation or intimidate you as how much you gotta work to get that 1.2 to lower taxes. So you're not gonna lower taxes a mil, ever, it's almost impossible. But to go a half a mil, do the math, it's like 600,000.
Right.
So that's something to think about, when you're thinking about, what do we do with that piece on 63, Are we happy a business moved in there? Yes, but, you're not you have to think about maximizing the potential of sites to get to that place.
Mhm.
You get better tax revenue.
Mhm. And one of the things we do want to do, I think, in a subsequent meeting would be to have Marcia Benno come in, the assessor, and give us a primer on how does the assessment process work, right? We were kind of chatting before the meeting, from a property tax standpoint, it's depreciated over time, right? So you buy a piece of equipment, it becomes worth less in tax revenue to the town every single year, right? When you look at the real estate value, especially in this case, we're talking about a lot of retail, that real estate value's going to basically stay the same, but it does fluctuate if there are vacancies, right? So the real estate is valued off of the P&L of the landlord, right? So if they're not generating revenue, then it's likely, I don't want to put words in Marcia's mouth, but this is my understanding of it. But really, this was to kind of give everyone a little grounding in where are we, right?
Might it be a good idea, I'm thinking for the group to, if we're thinking about using this to inform how we make a calling effort and how we start to develop the plan for retention and
Mm-hmm.
creations, might we want to start with the actual sort of full grand list, the commercial grand list, and sort of set up a diagram to see if our outliers, Dale, we may find that we have, like you in Hamden, your second, at least when I saw your bond rating, your second taxpayer was Whitney Center.
Right.
Second, maybe they're first now.
Now they're first, yes.
Yeah, because maybe they busted up the Dixwell Apartments, but maybe we should do that too and sort of look at where we are, because my guess is we may have a lot of our revenue centered in those assisted livings
Mm-hmm.
and
Oh,
those.
I'm sure you, it's true.
And that may be something that when we're doing our calling effort, we may
Right.
want to sort of bifurcate that in some respects to have sort of a committee that has a much more formal, and I don't know if this makes sense.
No,
but
it does.
A formal approach to the ones that are really driving this 28% and,
Right.
and the rest of it we're, down to the 7
Well,
or
this
8.
is where we talked about clusters.
Right.
Yeah.
Part of the drill in looking at your economy through clusters, healthcare being a big one here, is exactly that, is to find out what the facts are. And if you have your assessor come, which is a very good idea, she's also should explain how they also tax multifamily and many other things, because there's all different ways that they develop valuation based on, revenue. There's different ways. Machines are different. There's depreciation. There's all kinds of stuff that's way over my head. But it gives you a good grounding in where the money is. So if you have fervent anti-housing people, apartments we'll say, but you gotta listen to the facts. Those apartments produce tremendous amount of tax revenue. I can tell you these stories all day long about how people fought against the housing product because of the usual things they say about the school system and all. And they're one-bedroom apartments or efficiencies, which is the market, and they end up creating the kind of tax revenue you need. I mean, if you look purely looking at it that way, but having your assessor come and explain that is a good kind of grounding.
Yeah,
tool.
Dale, I think an interesting example when we spoke that you could share with the group was when you landed Home Depot,
Oh.
Walgreens,
Yeah.
right, and LA Fitness in Hamden, right? We
Right.
all can see it in our mind, like, you know exactly what you're talking about.
Yes. Well,
And you were a hero.
Well, yeah, well,
They built the
I
statue.
thought I
of
was a
Dale.
hero, but I guess, so what happened was, so that same math of 1.2 million for you was 3.7 million for Hamden, because their total grand list was 3.7 billion. This is a rule of thumb, it's not an exact science, it's, you know, could be off like 10 or 15%, but. So I had a 3.7 million in new tax revenue to affect 1 mil of taxation. My best year, 21 years, ever, and it's not even close, was like 2005, I think, or maybe 2006 fiscal year. I was telling Scott, I got Home Depot and the renovation of that center, if you know where Home Depot is in Hamden. There was a defunct shopping center that was completely rebuilt. LA Fitness, a new Walgreens, and there was something else about that size that I brought in. It was like my crowning achievements. Home Depot was really actually a lot of work because we had to do an eminent domain, we had to do a lot of things. It increased the tax revenue by like 500,000. That was it. Best year ever, you know.
At $3 million a mil. Right.
I was like, oh, I was proud of it, but I was like, oh, what do I have to do?
Right.
But
So I think that there are, expectations, right, on how much we can build the commercial base, right? But and Scott, I think to your point is you're getting at, are there clusters, right? And do we identify something? So I'll share that full list with everybody. Again, I just got it and I was cutting it to kind of just come up with a little small analysis here. I think if you dig into it a little deeper, what you will find is all the power lines that we see around Woodbridge, right? There's a lot of money there. Okay, a lot from CLMP and UI. And the assisted living is another big contributor, but I will share it. And I'm hopeful that that can help drive some of our conversation around the development of our economic strategy, our EDC strategy, right, going forward. So I wanted to, we can maybe move into that, right? We talked about the different pillars last week, right? So I don't know that I have a printout of it with me, but remember the big ones were retention, right? And then there was acquisition and recruitment, were the three of the big ones that really popped. Did anyone have any thoughts over the last couple of weeks around Woodbridge and where we might want to focus?
Well, a question maybe before the answer is, a question for the group or for Dale again, and sorry to keep going to the well, but do we just look at businesses for the taxes they generate, or do we also look for the employment that they create, potentially other district income that you could have that could come off of a, I'm not suggesting we're gonna have Dollywood or whatever that's gonna charge an entertainment tax, that kind of thing. But I'm saying is, do we also look at not just straight real estate taxes, but we look at, well, this creates 500 jobs down there though. Even though it only pays so much in taxes, it creates so much jobs in that sort of,
Feeds the rest of the businesses.
yeah, like is that our economic development? Does that go in our model also when we think about retention, attraction, creation? Are we looking to create jobs and that sort of thing for our?
I absolutely agree with that.
I agree with that, and I also think it's also, we have to keep in mind the vibe of the town. How do we want the town to be? How do we want people to think about as the town they live in? what kind of town do we wanna be in, so I think that should be a part of it as well.
If you have that many jobs or an entity, a business, and, some sort of catalytic project that may not even be a business, but a arts-related thing or whatever, you're bringing people, two things happen. One, the employees have the disposable income that they spend in your other businesses, your more retail, restaurants, maybe more restaurants start to appear. And, just bring people to the town in general, to use the assets of the town, if that's what you want. Not everybody wants like 8 million people coming to their town, but definitely the disposable income. I just finished a project today. It was the very last meeting with the client in New Hampshire, and they have a vacant piece of land right in the epicenter of the town. It's a town of 2,600 people. It's a small town, so a 4-acre site across from town hall is a big deal. And we did an economic study on how much economic impact would be on all the stores on Main Street around it. It was a big number. If they put in like 32 apartments, it's gonna be a mixed-use project at the end. So, yeah, the jobs are important because they also create spending in other places.
Are there
I
other
think that's
examples of other EDCs that were successful that started off with establishing those requirements or criteria for what the town wants before they go off and establish their development plan? Like, does the town want to grow the tax base by X%? Do we want to have a certain type of business? Do we want to bring in businesses that have X number of jobs versus smaller retail? Does that development of requirements or constraints, whatever you want to call them, before we move forward with developing a plan,
Well,
benefits in any way?
right. Benchmarks are dangerous, first of all, because the economy changes. Look at COVID, how it completely changed so many things and created opportunities, for business startups and things like that. So you got to be careful of benchmarks is my first comment. I also think that you need to understand the data that you have. This is telling me what he said, that your existing businesses are producing a huge amount of the tax revenue. You want to protect that. That gives you, the data gives you a little bit of direction. That being said, if you want to lower taxes, so you have to decide. And the other thing to point out, and I've been pointing this out to many of the towns I'm working in, is that you don't have a staff person, a paid staff person. So right now, the burden of doing a lot of this stuff is on a volunteer commission, and you may all volunteer your time to go to the next step and do other things, but ultimately it falls on the town. It falls on Mika. It falls on a consultant. I know they have an RFP out for now. I haven't really heard much about that yet, but so almost like be careful what you wish for. If you try to bite off too much, somebody's got to do the work. Somebody's got to go do the visits, and you might do some of them, and that's good, but ultimately you're not paid, and so you also don't want to not meet expectations. But I would say you look at the data is my best advice to you, and follow the data. If the data says that your existing businesses are paying way more in taxes than other towns percentage-wise, that to me is a little bit of a direction. But within
Towards
that,
retention.
for retention. And I brought my little worksheet, by the way.
Okay.
If you want to talk about that. And the other thing I would say about that is within the retention is more data and more analytics about those industries that are paying. So if you go out and you find your healthcare places are going to be big taxpayers. They're going to be up there. And they employ a lot of people. And they have MRI machines and they, all these things. So from there, it gives you more direction and retention on how to help them keep growing or just stay stable in some cases. And when you have a good program and you promote it, that leads to more attraction. If you start with attraction, you're ignoring this 28% of your tax revenue. That's just my view of it.
I had just one comment and really wanted to lay this out to Dale also. When I hear all this, I think about what we're really talking about also is the sustainability of our tax revenues. And with that comes an element of risk management that we don't, even though it may be very attractive for us to build out, to reward certain businesses to come to Woodbridge, that we want to be careful to maintain a level of comfort with it as it relates to concentrations of businesses in case we go through an economic cycle where a certain industry is heavily affected. And, you know, hearing you say about, you know, Home Depot, and I'm kind of familiar with that whole area down there, and $500,000 a year of revenue, and that was it. Well, but it is indeed sustainable for quite a
Yes.
period of time over X number of years as well, because you have leases in there that run for periods of time, and the likelihood of those businesses leaving once they're established, you know. And if you're doing things in the environment also to create, help those businesses attract customers, and they have that level of customers in their store, there's sustainability there.
And there's also built in, like in a situation like that, if you're able to get where Katz is in that whole traffic, I just came through it, it was like cars were everywhere.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that you get a better built infrastructure by working with, you know, the Home Depot. That Home Depot project changed what they call an F intersection at the DOT, meaning it's a failing intersection, to an A intersection with all the investments that had to be made to get that by, because that's Dixwell Avenue is a state highway. And so you make an investment and make the infrastructure more sustainable for multiple generations. That's another way you think about it too. So you're absolutely right with that word.
Yeah, so,
People
you know,
think
so
about it.
balance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're gonna encounter a lot of this, right? There are lots of, I mean, I did in the last 2 weeks, did quite a bit of poking around, like, you know, Madison has some very interesting perspective on things, and to me, it kind of felt a little bit about similar to Woodbridge, where they're really trying to balance economic growth. Like, we don't want to move the mill rate, and then they use the direct words, we want to protect our quality of life, right? And we know that that's huge here, right? So that's the sort of the balancing act that we have. So we're the task, right? Mika was here, like, we got to grow the grand list, right? That's what's in front of us. At the same time, we know, and you know, when I sat in on a lot of the 2030 conversations, right? The 2030 plan was built with what does Woodbridge want, right? What would Woodbridge accept, right? And that's really they put a lot of energy into having these town meetings, right? So that the town could see what's coming and how will it look and the aesthetics, and like a lot went into that portion of it. So, you know, we're going to be challenged with growing the tax base, but doing it in a way that's acceptable to the people of Woodbridge.
You know, when you do planning like that, and I did read their report and look at it, it was very well done. You know, the design, Piri, the architect, I've met her before, did a great job, and it created connectivity, and which it can equal to sustainability in areas, because if you make those improvements, you're improving the, you know, sidewalks, infrastructure, power. Sometimes they did this in Shelton, where they put all the power lines underground, which is 10 times more expensive, by the way. So if you think about that, that's you know, that's going to be on your dime. But when you talk, but at the core of it is, using the sports metaphor here, the blocking and tackling of economic development. How do you help your businesses keep going and growing, to then attract more of it, to connect to that design, that plan? The plan is not the outcome. The plan definitely helps your outcome of sustaining and growing your grand list, because it creates a place where businesses want to go. But it's, but you can't rely on that to be the sole thing that attracts businesses.
Agreed. So, I mean, I would like to make a recommendation that maybe preliminarily we focus on retention initially. One, it will help us really understand the businesses that are here that make up the 28% of the tax base in the town today, right? I mean, I think if that ever went in the other direction, it would create some major challenges. Additionally, I think as we learn more and what 2030 has planned, right, that will give us something to go and attract more new businesses, right, once we get an understanding of that shell. So we can kind of run two tracks, right? And if we put our emphasis on retention initially, right? And that doesn't mean we can't entertain other things along the way, but I think we do want to focus in the short run to kind of get going. So I don't know that we need to put it to a vote.
I think so, it's like direction, it's like
Okay.
a general idea. I mean, the specifics we'd have probably
Right.
have to put it to a vote.
I think also, in starting with the retention, I think you're right, we have to make sure that we understand what we have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether we call them clusters or we're the top quartile, whatever, we need to understand that so we can retain our business.
Mhm.
But something struck me at the last selectmen's meeting was, they were talking about a charter. It was an analogy, but they were talking about making a charter revision. And somebody was saying, well, I want to do that next year. And they said, well, then you better start tomorrow. In other words,
Right.
So in other words, I think we sort of, maybe if we think of the things coming down, we also have to start to be, doing the things that are low-hanging fruit for us right now that are in our basic charge.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think we have to start to think about what's the lead time for the kinds of things that the Economic Development Commission would like to do,
Mm-hmm.
or thinks, it would be the right thing to do
Mm-hmm.
to help the town. Because I think the lead time is tremendous on some of this stuff.
It is, right? And my own perspective is when you want to go, the business attraction and recruitment piece, you need to be really buttoned up on your product, right? I mean, it's a sales effort, so to speak, and right now, I don't know that we are that buttoned up, right? Especially with 2030, it's been aspirational. That was by design, right? And we're gonna need something a little more tangible to go after.
But what I did see in the last P&Z meeting, I watched it on TV, and SLR, who did the connectivity study with Peary for, they came up with the gondola idea. But they sort of talked about, West Rock down to the.
Yes, I got you.
Yeah, so talk about aspirational.
Right.
So did the guy at Quinnipiac, right? Didn't he want to do that as well from the York campus?
Yes, well, that was an amazing thing to watch, the York campus.
But what the senior advisor said to P&Z, that's the, for the POCD, the plan of development, he said that if, he sort of threw it out there that if you really want to be a catalyst, use this plan, and you want to sort of use your planning area as a catalyst for development. He specifically threw out there an MDA, a municipal development agency. So he specifically started talking to the planning folks and development, to develop the town. So that was something I heard, and that it kind of didn't, our P&Z is not as much planning, it's more zoning probably than planning as much, but honestly, but it's.
And I bet you they could help you form that MDA.
There's no question. The MDP he wanted to form, yeah.
I'm being a little
Right.
facetious there.
But I guess what I'm saying is that, that could be, I think some of those issues, what role we take in that, or should take or not take in that, because they're starting to suggest in the planning document for development that, do you want to be a catalyst and integrate the 2030 into that MDP, municipal development plan run by an MDA.
Well, I would say this about what you're saying, that your plan of conservation and development, your POCD, is state mandated.
Right.
Okay? If you want to go for state funding for anything, let's say you wanted to widen 63, I'm just making up something, because you wanted to expand your commercial base, or you wanted to improve the utilities, like, upgrade the sewer, or underground your utilities, or whatever it happens to be, the first question they're gonna ask you is how this relates to your POCD. They're not gonna worry about an MDA, they're not gonna worry about, those things are fine, but the POCD, I think, is a really underutilized and underappreciated document in every town, because it's state mandated. You won't get money if whatever the goal is doesn't align with your POCD. And secondly, the state plan of conservation and development, they have definitions. If you go on the state OPM's map, it's a color-coded map, and it shows, urban area, somewhat urban area. You'd be, suburban area or whatever. But 63 is probably going to show up in the color of redevelopment of focus. it also needs to somewhat relate to that as well. So the planning function is important, but there are some structural boxes you have to check if you want money to offset the cost rather than bonding it, for example. So let's say we're gonna bond that improvement versus, now, is 63 a state road or is it a town?
Yes.
State road.
Right, so if you're gonna bond their, do their road, you're gonna use state bond funds to do, if that's the goal. If you want to extend the sewer line, anything like that, does it match your P O C D? Does the outcome match your P O C and the state plan of conservation? All that other stuff is fine, because if you have an approved MDP, municipal development plan, it takes about 1 to 2 years to do that, by the way, I have gone through that. Then you do get some priority funding in some programs, just depends on, what it is. It could be anything utility-wise, but always start with your P O C D, because that's mandated by law.
Just to follow up on that, so is that something that now is happening with the 2030 plan? I mean, have they?
No, that's not part of the 2030,
Right.
that's sort of, that could be integrated into, but the state requires every 10 years you to come up with a plan of conservation and development.
So
And so that's due 2025, and so they just hired the selectmen just hired SLR to produce that, and that will be due in 2025, so they'll start those community conversations, they'll start those planning studies and say, what do you want to put in that?
So that work that they did in 2030 could become a node of development for, under your P O C D,
I see,
versus driving it, they're
Right.
part of the P O C D. That's how it would work.
okay.
So I guess it's just something for us to, I don't know what our role would be in the planning process, in the planner, but, I mean, I think, in terms of retention is important, but I also think we have to keep an eye towards,
Well, as you said, it's, things take a long lead
Yeah.
time, and, if it's 2025, it's just not that far away
No.
in reality, so.
Right. Okay. So what I would like to recommend is next, when we get together again in April, that we initiate the retention, you had the retention strategy?
Yeah, I have a worksheet,
Yep.
depending on what pillar or group, you call it group pillars, whichever one a town would want, I have a worksheet. I have one for retention, I shared it with Scott. It basically puts you on several tasks to lay the groundwork, to get the data, by the way, to further getting the data, you have some of it now, to give you, and it also gives you ways to get information, which was one of your questions, how do we know where the businesses are coming in? And
Right.
it's all part of that. So this worksheet that I have, and I could send it out ahead of time.
Okay.
Now, since you're almost all new on the commission, usually commissions after a while develop subcommittees, and that'll be up to you to do. But ultimately, if you touch on different pillars, let's say you move into retention or some other one, it's probably not gonna be creation, but you never know. There's certain things that are common to each pillar, keeping the mill rate reasonable and things like that. And then there's some things that are very specific, depending on the pillar. If it's attraction, we talked about this last time, you have to have some available housing in your community to attract the company or business to come here, stuff like that. But I will send this out ahead of time, and I think it's a good starting point for the commission to do some work on this.
Okay, great. All right, so I want to move into a quick discussion on the tax incentive program. So last time when we met, we kind of gave everyone a little history on what we've proposed in Woodbridge. There was a tax abatement program that went back to 2020, like right before the pandemic, that did not make its way through the Board of Selectmen. 2 years later, Brian, who's not with us tonight, Brian and I kind of quarterbacked the development of a slightly refined version of that, and went about presenting that to the Board of Selectmen, and essentially where we netted out was the first selectman and the town attorney decided that we wanted to react to business opportunities versus have a published incentive plan, right, that would be available to everyone. So that's grounded in this statute 1265B. So Dale, I was hopeful you could, based on that, when we had a conversation the other
Yes.
day, you said, well, that may not have been the right application, right? Of,
Yeah, well, the sort of read and react, whenever you offer a tax abatement, unless there's something I don't know, you have to be empowered through a law, a statute that gives the town permission because we're all part of this system. And 169 towns have their, their own way of doing things, but anybody who has an incentive program, unless they put out small grants or something like that, if it's taxes, because it all ties together with the state government ultimately, you have to be empowered to do it. It could be through the federal government or through the state government. So
Mhm.
to say you're just gonna react with nothing approved that empowers you to do it, it's not gonna work. I'm not saying it's wrong to think that way, I'm saying it's just not gonna work. Now, again, if you wanna offer, I've worked with towns that have waivers of building permit fees, but you're talking peanuts there. But it's good for builders, no doubt about it. Or if you wanna give them a $5,000 grant to do their facade improvement, that would come out of your general fund. That has nothing to do with the state. But when it comes to 1265B, that's a state statute. The difference between 1265B and things like enterprise zones and other programs like enterprise zones is that when you have an enterprise zone, and there are other programs like it that the state administers, another complicated story, you almost are required to give that tax abatement. You don't have a lot of choice in an enterprise zone. If somebody has a really smart lawyer, no offense to the lawyers, they could kind of force the town to give them a tax abatement. This happened in East Hartford when UTC put $40 million, and they were in an enterprise zone, and the city didn't process an enterprise zone application. They got forced to give them a tax abatement on a $40 million project. So the value of the state programs is you have complete control over how much you give as an abatement and to whom you give it. So when you have enterprise zone benefits, it's usually based on the NAICS codes. I think we talked about this, or that people know it as SIC codes. But they're identifying codes by industry. Manufacturing would be 3736, and then the type of manufacturing would have a point, plastics, metals, whatever it is. And every business has a NAICS code. My business has a NAICS code. I don't know what it is, but I know I have one. And you can find out by contacting the State Department of Labor if you ever want to know. But you can just Google it. You can find out a complete list of NAICS codes. So in an enterprise zone program, you can say only manufacturing, health sciences, biotech, STEM related, something like that. Generally speaking, those programs are good. But when it comes to 1265B, you have to pass something at the Board of Selectmen level to say, yes, we're going to offer this. I can get you a resolution, a sample resolution, by the way.
okay.
I have that. And once you pass it, it doesn't mean you're just giving away money. Now you have to decide how decisions are made.
Right.
And so in some towns, it goes right, applications go to the finance director, and it goes right to the Board of Selectmen. You have nothing to say about it. But as the Economic Development Commission, and doing something like this, which has some level of controversy to older time taxpayers, they don't want to give away tax revenue. What 1265B does, and Derby, I read both of them, Derby is the better, closer approximation of what you'd want. It tells you exactly what you can offer. Based on a $3 million investment, you get 70% abatement on the increased value, 60% the second year, all the way down to 10%. Just read the Derby one, it tells you what to do. But it's only on the increased value, not on the entire property. So what happens is with 1265B, whoever makes that decision gets together in a room and gets an application. I can get you a sample application as well. And says, okay, we got Scott Hunter's application. He has a construction business. He's going to build a 8,000 square foot metal building to put his office and and a covered thing for his trucks and whatnot. And he's going to invest $400,000. And he builds the building. You give him the tax abatement based on looking at Derby's, how they break it down by the level of investment. It's all based on capital investment. If you want to add in other things like job creation in the actual agreement that gets passed, you can do that. Nothing stops you from doing that. But you have to be empowered to offer it in the first place under 1265B, because that's a state rule. So you have a choice as a commission whether you want to get in the middle of that and take the applications. Maybe the applications go to Tony or Tamika, and then you reconvene a subcommittee of this group and you talk about it. You know, is this worthwhile? If the max you can give them is 50% for 3 years, you don't have to give them 50%. You give them 25%. It's a construction company, and you know we know them. They're going to be a good citizen, but it's construction. They're not bringing anything like massively expensive. They're building a little metal building. You may give them the full 50%, but you have the option of asking to be in that process. Sometimes that's made legal, like your board of board of selectmen can't vote on it unless you vote on it. It can be informal. I can guide you through that once you get to that level, but you have to be empowered as a town to offer it, and you have a whole structure. You could just look at derbies, and you know you can just adopt something like that. But again, you don't have to give anybody the max, and you don't have to give somebody anything. If the town says, you know, it's just a little retail center, they're doing a big renovation, but it's replacing one retail with another retail. That's not really helping your grand list, you know, so.
Right.
You know, there's a process involved that's easiest to do when it comes in, and you kind of go through the process once or twice, and you'll get that. It's pretty easy. It's just that you have to advise your board of selectmen, if that's the way they want to do it.
If I could spitball, I'm learning and spitballing. Is there a risk though in, I think, incentives to create investments into our, town, and, more grand list and more employment and so forth is great. But is there a risk if it's not targeted to what we want to do? Let me say this, that if we've got a 2030 committee, they've done connectivity and they've done placemaking. And so I'm reading through that. I'm not advocating whatever is right or wrong, but they're working on that diligently and saying, they're suggesting mixed use zoning changes to be made. They're suggesting design elements to be put in through the area because and I'm not suggesting, I'm not up on this yet,
Right.
but spitballing, I'm worried that if we adopt an incentive overall and then we come in and we're incentivizing Scott's business, I shouldn't say Scott's, but a design business that doesn't fit with the plan, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
You can do anything you want.
So no, I'm concerned though that we're starting to do things that are sort of not in concert in integrating where we're headed with the POCD and the 2030. While I would want to do the incentives right away, have them on deck and so forth, I would be really worried about incentivizing something that doesn't fit with
Gotcha.
where we want to go.
Right.
No,
And,
I think
and
you
I'm
make
not
it a-
suggesting where we want to go is bad or good,
Yeah,
and just
no.
where the town wants to go.
You want to get down the road a little bit before you roll out something, because you're using the tool to achieve that goal.
I mean, we can't do mixed use. So
We can.
Huh?
We can, not yet.
So you
Right,
want to
we
wait.
can't. I mean,
Right.
we can't do it until
What
you
you're
actually have a
suggesting
hearing,
makes
change the
no-
zoning,
not yet.
and the
Yeah.
public's going to come out, and you're going to have to go through that whole process. But I'm just saying is, if that comes in, then obviously your incentives, but if you were really, somebody was looking to have mixed use, then you would want incentives once you have the mixed use in there. If you had the incentives before the mixed use, you may not. You may be, a key piece of property may be incentivized not to be the cornerstone of the plan.
Your point is very well taken,
Yeah.
and you may hold off until things progress, and that would be a wise way to look at it.
However, I don't say in the retention. I think let's
Well-
get out there and talk about,
Yeah.
we're pro incentives.
And believe me,
but we're
well,
going to
if you-
tailor them.
If you're gonna go down the road of incentives, you gotta do some, you gotta be salespeople here a little bit with your
Yeah.
mothers and fathers that make decisions on the money in the town. You also have to do, remember, economic development is a team sport, that slide, okay? Your assessor and your tax collector are not gonna be happy about the incentives, I can tell you right now. Now, I used to bring them into the committee and make them vote on it, because that was just my way of sort of, keeping them
by it.
right in front of me. They still complain about it, but you need to touch those bases and spend time, and look at some case examples, which I definitely can provide to you.
Mhm.
And it's not as scary, but I think what you're saying is absolutely on the mark, but you have to do some politicking and some education on how it works before so it might take you that year, I guess is what I'm saying to you, to really get it in sort of the lexicon of how town works.
So what I'm hearing is, let's progress it, right?
Right.
We want it to be targeted, Scott, is your suggestion, right, towards the strategic priorities for the town.
That have been put up.
Yeah. I mean, there's also is this an incentive for existing businesses, right? That we may, as we look at the retention strategy, right, that could be another thing to help support them, right? Prevent somebody from leaving, for example, right?
Well, one quick note on that, I had incentive program for the entire time I was in Hamden, and I did about 150 different applications for all kinds of things, manufacturing, just small retail, mixed use. And something like 70% of it were existing businesses that took advantage of it, that just wanted to expand, put 1,000 square feet on, do a whole HVAC improvement, a new roof and lighting. We wanted, part of our criteria was, how would it look like at the
Mhm.
end, not just a crappy metal building or something like that.
I think we could do
Different
both.
levels of that.
What I'm hearing is we could have a targeted program, right, that fits with 2030, and we can have maybe a more general one. I mean, I looked at New Haven's that Mika sent around, and that was specific to improvements on existing property, right? Like, it was not about building new buildings at all, so they were very specific
Okay.
with that. I mean, that's something we could look at. What I think we should do here is kind of revisit what we have on the table, right? And begin the conversations. I think it really is gonna, we'll get passed, it has to get passed by the Board of Selectmen, right? And kind of shape this, move it down the road a little bit, and I think it goes into the next conversation, which is on the business community outreach, right? And I think that is where we're gonna get a lot of learning, right? Both from the retention, and as we focus on retention and we do this business community outreach, then I think we're gonna start to be able to shape, all right, what's working, what's not working, right? And that can help fuel the attraction strategy down the road, right? Like, here's where our gaps are, and this is what we need to shore up, right? So, kind of in the interest of time on this, and hopefully we can do this over email, like within FOIA, to sort of generate a list. I mean, Rick, would you want to be the kind of
Sure.
the keeper of that?
I can
You
be
had
the
started
keeper of the list.
that conversation, and I think we're safe to just chime in and kind of build that.
Okay.
Does that sound like a plan, or?
We might want to seek, I think we've got to be careful, because if we do have a quorum in an email,
Mhm.
it is a meeting, and regardless of whether
Okay.
it's not, I just want to be,
Yeah.
I would
I
want
know,
to be
you'd-
careful
you'd-
in that if we do have a quorum in an email and one person, at least when I went to FOIA training, it brings up a good point. I ordered from Pullman Comley down in Bridgeport, the author, I believe one with Tony, Understanding Connecticut's Freedom of Information Act. I got
Okay.
a thing on it.
Yeah.
I don't know, and I don't know, maybe that's why they do subcommittees, but I think giving assignments, I think, is fine, and I think if we don't have a quorum, it's not a meeting.
Right.
And I think that's good, but I think when we get into, I think, at least the way I understood it, when we get everybody on an email, somebody then responds, you could be deemed to be a meeting that somebody didn't get to see. They want to know what's in that meeting, and so that's the violation. Not that we did anything bad, we're not doing anything evil, we're trying to do good for the town.
Right.
But that could be the evil of not having the transparency in the meeting. So I think we gotta make sure not to reply all kind of thing. It's like-
Right.
In
Like,
North-
go for it, Rick, and work with him.
In
You know,
North
like,
Branford-
I
so work
can't
with-
watch you, I'll
Okay.
listen
Yeah.
to you in the meeting.
Yeah, no, in North Branford, they had this same kind of issue, because I gave them some assignments, and they were all gonna start talking to each other, same kind
Yeah.
of thing. And they had, what they did was they had assignments of people getting information, and then they had a special meeting live in between the normally scheduled meeting. You can call, special meeting, doesn't have to be that long, just like an update, as long as you, even if you didn't have a quorum, but you published you noticed it, there's no law saying you have to have a quorum, because you're not voting on anything, you're reporting out what you found, right? It's not like you approve minutes or something like that.
Right.
So in their case, they had a smaller gathering of their commissioners to talk about what they found, but at a live meeting.
And
Okay.
Scott, I'm so glad
Yeah.
you said that, really. The thing that makes me a little bit uneasy is, in these conversations with business owners, we're going to come across potentially confidential information.
That's a good point. Trade secrets kind of stuff.
Yeah, and we're gonna be holding public meetings. I really think that we need to lay out some ground rules as to how we're going to discuss what it is that we've learned, in such a way that it's generic, so that there's not the possibility that somebody's being damaged down the road.
Right, expressing
it-
somebody's intent to do something
Yeah.
when that could be very, very confidential.
Things change, and we want to do the right thing. We absolutely want to do the right thing, and I think that we'd all be best served if we're just super careful about how we describe conversations and potential events.
Sometimes groups will develop a worksheet if they go visit a business. You're gonna have lots of informal conversations, and it gives them an ear to bend a little bit on things that are bothering them about the town or about what life, their wife or your husband, whatever.
Yeah.
But if you go in with a checklist with generic answers, and then you have the other information that they're telling you, but at least you have something written that is not gonna be confidential.
Yeah.
Key concern, employees, taxes,
And have them complete it.
Well, you work with them, you talk to them and you check it off yourself. I mean, you could do it either way. You could do a survey, but people hate getting, you buy a cup of coffee, you get a survey now.
Right.
So annoying.
And
I
a request
literally
for a
went to
tip.
Walgreens
Get
and
anything
bought
with those.
a pair of eyeglasses and I got a survey. I was like, I'm not filling that out. I refused. I'm throwing them all out soon, but
Okay.
anyway, but you can, but you're absolutely right. They're gonna tell you things, a lot of times, people told me things I really did not wanna know, but
Yeah.
they need to
Yeah.
talk to somebody.
Right.
Okay.
So maybe a way to attack this would be, instead of a reply all, to your point, we just go directly to Rick, he's sort of the keeper, and
Yeah.
then we can share that out here in the
You
public.
share out more generic information and, as you talk. And when Tony takes minutes, she's not taking verbatim minutes like, if she's in court. She's
Right.
you're doing summary notes, right?
Right.
So, there are
Yeah, I
events
think
and
we're
there are
all
events.
able to take homework home and do our homework and then come back
Come back
and
and
say, here's our
report.
homework
Yeah.
and,
Right.
and here's our list,
Okay.
our grand list, and here's our
Okay.
top 10.
We
All
met
right.
with the manufacturer that is extremely upset with, the cost of energy, or they're extremely upset with the way the town, even though sometimes the town's not the one who plows the road, it's the state. Well, you don't have to name, by naming them, is sort of where you're going. And sometimes other businesses are looking to see what other people are doing. They're
Sure.
looking
Right.
at their competitors. That's
Yeah.
another issue entirely.
Right.
Manufacturers trying to steal other people's employees is a big one.
Right.
It happens all the time.
Wow.
Right.
Oh, they have CNC machine operators? Oh, we need 2 of those.
Right.
Great.
Right,
No, I-
drivers.
Yeah,
Come
drivers.
across this, talk to vendors, and they're like, oh yeah, sure, I'll show you
Yeah.
exactly what I did for them, right?
Yeah, but I volunteer to.
Okay,
spearhead that.
perfect.
But I would like to have a conversation with you to see how that's shaped.
Sure.
Talk about, do a questionnaire survey, that's a great idea. But I have some ideas on that. but
Yeah, I
we
mean, I
can
think
talk-
that
yeah.
then, the specific outreach, what I'm trying to do is not have 30 days go by,
Agreed.
right? And then you say, okay, now we have the names, we'll talk in May about,
Yeah.
what are the questions, right? We can move it along a little faster, but we gotta be careful,
Okay.
without a doubt. And
Doing
Steve,
that.
good point, like, trade secrets, proprietary info, it can happen pretty quickly.
So Scott, what is our homework, individual homework?
So
Outreach.
what I would say, the homework here is share into Rick, like, names of local businesses that you know, folks that you know or that are local business owners
Right.
that we could go and
See,
initiate?
But I think it's type of business, not name of business.
Okay. Well, just where we would want to focus some conversations so we can get out and start,
And remember, an email is a public record, it is foiable.
right?
So in other words, when you do put it in an email, it is a public document from
Mhm.
our committee, so, that's not bad, right?
Right.
It's what we're trying to do the good thing.
Right.
But it's a public, it is a commission document.
Right.
That email,
Mhm.
and you can say, give me all your emails, you know.
Right.
So goes to your point about, about making sure that, you treat it as I think you have to treat I'm not trying to play lawyer, that's for sure.
Right.
I never got it right.
Believe me, it's all very real.
Yeah, but I mean,
It's all
I
very-
think we just gotta make sure that we, are comfortable that it is a commission. If you send an email, it is a commission, it might not be a meeting, cause it's not to a quorum, but it is a commission document.
What I'm envisioning is we develop a hit list of, hey, if we each come with 3 to 5, right? Then out of the 7 of us or so, right, we've got a healthy list that we can go out and have some conversations, bring the conversations back here, right? So that we can start to build out, like, what are the needs in terms of retention, right? Like, how do we, and then that will also help inform some of the attraction, right? Like, what needs to change in the, within the business climate. But the first step is, I think, to build that list and then carve it up, and we go out and start talking.
You might
to the
find
owners.
within a given industry, whatever that industry is, that you might get value later bringing them together
Mhm.
for a conversation, by
Right.
talking to them about what their needs are. Certain industries are always gonna tell you workforce, our problems are workforce. Other industries are gonna say power, it's all about electricity and utility costs, but you might have find opportunities, Scott, to your point, of where are the gaps and the needs in that industry. Never mind who they are, by naming them necessarily, and then maybe having an event with them
Mhm.
and bringing in resources that,
Yeah.
that they can, like I used to get together healthcare or manufacturing, and then I would bring in the workforce partners and get them together for bagels and coffee. And invariably, there were matches to be made, we have some programs, we have students at such and such high school or college through Gateway or something that could be, CNAs in your healthcare place, or you'll find, but once you learn the sort of patterns within an industry, it'll give you more, that's sort of what we're gonna talk about in the retention overview. How to help build their resources based on your data, we talk about data
Mhm.
is key,
Mhm.
king.
Okay. So I think we should communicate to Rick, like,
Yeah.
let's build that list, and then, obviously, we'll keep the conversations just one way,
Okay.
right?
Could I make a suggestion? So
Yeah.
when you are emailing Rick, you don't have to copy everybody.
Right.
Just send Rick the communication, and
Okay.
if I ever send you something, don't communicate to one another.
Right.
It should be one way, because it is, even if it's not a quorum,
Mhm.
it could be considered, it is a meeting, you don't have to have a quorum to have a meeting. You only need a quorum to vote, so it
Right.
could be viewed,
Okay.
like, to your point, it could be viewed as a meeting.
And then there would be a group meeting where things would be summarized.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so just to keep moving, the 240 Amity Road update, I did just want to share out, I had a initial conversation with the broker. And that property is for sale. One of the things I did want to discuss with them was Mika had thrown out mixed use. Okay, I did have a conversation with, or email exchange with Chris Sullivan, our zoning enforcement officer, and that section of Amity is not zoned for mixed use at this time. So, it was a chance for me to go through that with the broker. It is something that's being discussed, right? But at this point in time, that is not zoned for mixed use. The broker said he's had a lot of a lot of interest so far, but really in bringing in something similar to what was there, right?
What was there
So-
before?
it was a trailer.
Oh.
The business is Elm City Trailer. They're moving to Bethany, right?
I see.
And it was, I also tried to pick at a little bit, like, what is the reasoning for, right? And it was not dependent on one or the other, meaning they're not selling it because the tenant's moving and vice versa, right? It was sort of independent of one another. So that was what, we really came through there. I did establish the connection with him, so we'll learn more about it along the way, Did get some, and even we talked about local businesses. The other constituents are these brokers, because they're the ones that are out selling Woodbridge, the front line. So, 15-minute conversation with him, I gleaned a little bit about Woodbridge and zoning and kind of what some of our, I'm sure we're going to hear come back after these conversations. So I'm going to make a habit of trying to get more connected to some of the commercial brokers in the area. Our former chair, Jeremy Rosner, is our commercial real estate broker, right? So it's a good jumping off point there.
And if you're working on the questionnaire, one of the things that just struck me, it hit a chord. It's the owner of the business, sure, but I'm thinking also it's the workforce within the business too, right? That is also our customer, like you said. There's lots of different customers, and everybody says, "Why I love to work at Woodbridge. It's really fun to come here. You can always get a good, you can get lunch. You can get, I love coming. I mean, I think that also for economic development. So maybe the questionnaire is not just what. They're going to find they need to maintain a workforce, right? So if they have a happy worker, is a happy, owner of a
Right.
business, right?
Yeah.
But I think at the same time is, I can remember doing some surveys on different things in life, and vertically the questions are important. Having I don't know if that is possible. You don't go to the factory floor and say, how do you like Woodbridge, working in Woodbridge? But there may be some.
Well,
It can be done.
The more you talk to a business, the more they'll tell you, and by osmosis, you'll get to know some of their workforce. In certain industries, the workforce is interesting to get to know because they go home and say, I could do this, and I would like to start a business. There's a lot of spin-offs that come out of enhancing the workforce. The owners will be a little protective of that, but as you go along, if somebody who works in a healthcare place is not going to open a healthcare place, but somebody who's in construction, manufacturing, they might be, if everybody knows you're out there, or maybe you have a coffee tour of a place some morning, and they give you a tour of their place, and you chit chat with the workers there. It doesn't have to be so formal, but you might want, because if it's manufacturing or distribution, I think Jamie Scott. James Scott has a air handling business in, I think it's still in Woodbridge, if I'm not mistaken. It's right off of 69. But anyway, we used to have a lot of events at his shop. Then he would give us a tour and show us what they do, and they all love showing what they do. And then invariably, their workforce is there.
Yeah.
It's not like they have thousands of people. You don't have that size of company anywhere in this region. But that's another way to tackle it, is to not just do a survey, is to actually, once you get to know them, go there and have an event some morning. And then you make really stronger connections because it's on their territory.
And when we're setting up these calls, what is the request we're asking of the business?
Great question. You just be honest, and basically you want to, see how they're doing, see how you can help, how the town can help, because you are appointed by the town. And if you're genuine, you say you just want to learn more about what they do, and you want to see how you can help. Sometimes they say no, sometimes they don't want anybody there, but you kind of have to do it on their territory. Like with the manufacturer, be prepared to go there at 6:30 in the morning.
Of course.
They're not going to talk to you at 10 o'clock in the morning when they're on the floor doing stuff. Most of them are undermanned anyway. So I don't think you have to do anything but be honest with why you're going. But I would go with a little bit more knowledge about what they do. Don't go in there and say, so what do you do here?
Right. Right.
That's insulting. You definitely want to learn everything. You're not going to know everything, but learn what they do. They all have news on their websites. If if it's at that level of business for a company. But, I don't think there is like a standard goal. I think it's retention. How can we help you? How, are you happy? What do you do? And then you can ask questions, like if you're going to a manufacturer, I might have mentioned this before. So who's your supply chain? That's one of my favorite
Right.
questions. You know, who do you buy, your material from? Or, depending on what the industry is, if it's food manufacturing, where do you, who do you use for trucking? I mean, there's a supply chain basically attached to every business that exists.
Right.
People farm out all their stuff. You don't wanna know who their HR, who does payroll for them necessarily, but that gets a conversation going, cause eventually you're gonna learn
Right.
who all these players are, and you can do some matchmaking. You learn a lot of stuff by just going there.
Right. Absolutely. And I think hopefully if we're using our own contacts initially, right, we'll get some receptivity,
Right.
right, to having the conversation, and then we get it going. All right. So on the bar grant, I don't have any update there.
I can tell you that it went in,
Okay.
and I did contact the head of the program, just to say that, I hope you look at that application favorably. I actually work with her a lot on other things, and I volunteer my time on things that they do, so, it's all part of the process of building a relationship so you can get some benefits from it. And, but anyway, she heard me, and I very briefly explained what the application was. They're just doing their initial reviews right now, and we might get some questions. Mika might get some questions in the next couple of weeks, but generally they're saying May to June.
Okay.
The awards will be made. I'm gonna say it's before June 30th, and I'm also gonna say it's probably middle of June. To take their time. I could be wrong, but.
All right. And on that note, I know, Cliff, you were on the webinar yesterday
Yeah,
on
it was
this
pretty
PFAS.
interesting.
It was.
PFAS?
PFAS, right?
Wow. Scary.
Which is probably not for tonight, given the timing. Maybe for the next meeting we can share, because I don't know if your head went where my head did, which was, God, I hope I don't own a golf course at this point, right?
Or anything for that.
Or anything, but a golf course was what sort of was
Yeah.
on my brain when I
It's-
hear
it's-
about
it's
forever
everything.
We have a golf
chemicals.
course.
Right, we have a golf course, yeah. So, I think we could share that. I mean, I got the deck and we downloaded it and I have my notes, but I think it falls into this area with Brownfield. And then, we were also gonna talk about new business, right? So, and then I also had on here, the 2030 committee, right? Which their next meeting is next week? No, 2 weeks. On March 26th is when they meet again. They actually haven't met since November. I went back and looked at a couple of their minutes. So I think it'll be good to get an update at our next meeting in terms of 2030 and where they are. I know Steve was asking me like what our role on 2030 would be. I know the chair of the EDC sat on 2030, the former chair, right? So we could maybe look at that as well, so that we have a little more connectivity. But one thing, I want to keep as kind of a standing for future meetings is who's moving to town, who's leaving town, right? I think we should really be up on that. And I can tell you from my own standpoint, like in the past, we sort of found out about a lot of things sort of sporadically. And Tony and I were talking about it, like part of the reason for that is there's no like really welcoming committee or exit interview from Woodbridge. There's a variety of different ways that you can find out, right? The assessor is probably the last person to find out, right? Because they find out when the taxes are filed. So, I know, Dale, you had
Yeah,
maybe some
there's a
insight.
million ways to find out, but it is by accumulating information from several sources. So one thing, first of all, is your building department and zoning folks. So you have to institutionalize some contact with them, either through Mika or somebody, if they end up hiring a consultant, planning consultant, which I know the RFP's out right now, that, you know, that person could have that task. Also, your town clerk, they're required to actually register with your town clerk. Not all businesses even know that, so, but that's part of like the town hall part of learning. The town clerk would have that information, because if somebody comes to town, they have to register their business, so it gets on the radar. But again, not everybody even knows that, it's not somebody's fault, it's just, they don't know. I think your comment about developing relationships with brokers is really one of the key ways to find out information, what's, you know, what happened, what's closed, because they all get the same, you know, data, what's closed, what, you know, what's happened. So you wanna try to find one or two different ones that you talk to, not from the same business.
Right.
Somebody like Jeremy would know, he'd be a very good resource, but you also wanna get another opinion, not opinion, but just information, you know, what have you seen happening, even if they don't, sometimes they can come to this meeting periodically, but you could just talk to them and find out, whoever that somebody is on this board, giving
Right.
you all these tasks. What chamber would a business join? New Haven Chamber? You don't have a Woodbridge Chamber, would be New Haven?
Probably.
I believe so.
So there might be some value in developing a relationship with Ann Benowitz, who was leading that meeting. I was supposed to be on that call, I was on it. I couldn't make it. I've heard it already though. Scary. But Ann is a really, well-connected person in business openings, and there's a whole group of people at the New Haven Chamber. So, maybe even having her come to a meeting,
Right.
yeah, at some point,
Yeah.
she would know, because if a business opens, they're like hawks, they come in because they want to join the chamber. So that's another resource. It's really going to all these places, developing a social media campaign and making businesses aware of it, because they want to tell people that they opened, giving them a free way of doing that. There's no one way, I guess is what I'm saying to you, but there are things you can do. It's all building relationships.
Right. Yeah, I know in my own experience, when I acquired a business in a certain town, right, and at one point I bought 8 at one time, and it was, the early warning system was the health department, which begat the building, I said the building department wants to come in and look around, oh, the fire marshal would like to come in and look around, so those departments sort of are on the front lines, and the last ones to find out are the tax assessor, right, because they really, until you've filed those first taxes, right, so I think it'd be a matter of kind of poking around our different departments. Our assessor did say, you know, she finds out by driving around town, right, and looking for it. But in past meetings, it was a little disappointing because we would hear like, okay, so and so is leaving, right, and it's like, wow, how did we not have any insight?
Scott, as our chairman, do you think you could get a box? Do we have a, Tony, does Scott have a box for Economic Development Commission in the mail slots? Because I know, like, when there's a land use application that comes,
Then you find out who the owner is and you see what's going on, but that's another way, check the agendas and follow up on it.
I know my prior life, like you would have businesses, but my prior life, there was always some, you know, there had to be quite a bit of copying, but who got copied was important. But
Right.
once it got in there, then it got around to where it needed to
It
get,
did,
like you
yeah.
said, it got around to
Yeah.
whoever's the call master,
Right.
for the utility companies,
Right.
you know, or the
Right.
call master for the healthcare, or the call master for the restaurants, or the, you know.
So, okay, and I think the last item is just our next meeting, which, Tony, we have for April 14th.
I think it's April 11th.
Okay, good. Like the 14th is not a Thursday.
Yeah,
This
did I
is like
have
a
that on
Sunday.
an old, I might have had it on an old agenda, and then I don't think everybody got it. On this agenda, I have April 11th.
Okay.
Let
Good.
me send up the right one.
Yeah. Any conflicts with that date for anyone?
I don't think so.
All right. So with that, I can entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion. Chatty?
Second.
Rick seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Thanks, sir.
All right.